everyone. I'm glad you could join us today. We're going to talk about Microsoft 365, and we'll kind of get some confusion out of the way right away, because I know that there's lots of different names for what we consider 365 for Microsoft. There's the Office 365, there's the O365, there's the Microsoft 365. Well, the new name for this week is M365. So those of you that have been around Microsoft long enough probably know the name changing that is so common within their products. But if you look at this screen, this is kind of, I think, a cool shot of the Microsoft 365 products. There is a lot of different software products out there that Microsoft supports. This is a good periodic table that shows the different features and kind of what business function they fall under. It's very common for the Microsoft 365 suite to be a bit overwhelming as well. So we always say that, there's certainly a subset of these tools that should and could be used. And I think Frank and I were going to go through today with you some case studies that just show good examples of where other tools that maybe you're not using within Microsoft 365 that you're probably already paying for, that could probably really help your daily function in your business. So this is kind of what we're gonna cover today. So this is kind of another view. If those of you that have M365 today have probably been to this page. This is the office.com. This is your web version of your Microsoft 365 product, and commonly used is the upper left-hand corner. You'll see it's called the waffle, and it actually kind of looks like a waffle. And what that'll do is show you all the different Microsoft 365 products that are associated with you and your subscription. And in the bottom left-hand corner, a cool part about M365 is there is thousands of different applications that can be used within M365. So this is really just the tip of the iceberg. I always use Salesforce is a good example. There's add-ons and features where you could easily combine Salesforce with your current Microsoft 365 products. So it can be overwhelming. So I think what we can try to do today is hone in on a few different tools that are used commonly that could really help you in your business. So here's our agenda. First off, I would like to reintroduce Frank Carlson. Frank is with Perceptive Software Solutions. They have been a business partner of ours for some time. We work closely together with our partners to enhance their Microsoft 365 experience, do migrations, and really try to get the most out of the tools that you're already likely paying for with your M365 subscription, excuse me. So Frank, I'm going to just let you kind of introduce yourself here quick, if that would be okay.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Colin. Hi everyone. Frank Carlson, as has been mentioned. I love that Mary introduced me as a software engineer, because I wear many different hats and have different roles, but being introduced as an engineer, that means I can geek out a little bit, I think, and everybody might be okay with that. But I think, Colin, between you and I, we've got what kind of scary. We've got over 50 years of experience, huh? Or pretty darn close to it. So that's a lot of time in the space.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, so I guess you're aging me. I do have a little gray in my beard, if you can't notice, but
I was just going to comment that I was grateful he didn't throw me into the bundle.
Yeah.
We might have broken the bank.
So our agenda today, again, endless possibilities with Microsoft 365. As you could tell by the periodic table and in the other page we looked at, there's just a ton of different tools, and it can be a bit overwhelming. But some of the tools that we're going to share today should help you with getting an idea of what might work for you and your business. We're actually going to do this through a series of case studies. So these are real world examples of projects that we've done together with current clients of ours. So some very real world examples here that we're going to talk through. And we identify a business problem, and then we also share, what that solution was and how we went about getting there. There's going to be some pro tips in there that hopefully you can take away as some good facts, and also some hidden gems. So our first case study, this is a really great organization. It's based here in the Twin Cities, and it is a nonprofit that, excuse me, this is an affordable housing project for Midwest. I was getting my slides confused there. With many properties, it's across 4 states. They're a great company. And the business problem that they were really trying to solve, and I'm guessing you're going to agree, and some of you have probably experienced this, there was documents scattered and there was old documents stored. They were stored in different locations. Kind of got to the point where nobody really knew where what they needed was. And then you'd run across some documents that were aging. And the employees were not connected, engaged, and that was a lot of that is due to just them being spread across 4 different states. And if we think about COVID recently, a lot of that occurred during COVID, where all of a sudden we were in the office all communicating on a daily basis, standing around the water cooler, and all of a sudden, boom, we were sent home. And we were no longer able to communicate with our colleagues like we once were. And this particular company did have high turnover, and the trust in the data was eroding, meaning that they didn't know where to find it. And when they did find it, a lot of times it might not have been the most current version. So our solution was really setting a governance plan of who was in charge of what and who had access to what was important to them, and team-centric user interface, which is, again, trying to take the place of what you do when you're in the office and you're able to communicate in person. We can do a lot of that. It's not the same, but we can do a lot of that with Teams. And then making it easy to use, really from a view of Windows Explorer, which we're all used to. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank on the document circle of life for Microsoft 365.
Thanks, Colin. This is another really interesting graphic to me, because it talks about the 3 services that sometimes people talk about all as one: OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint. There's overlap between them, but one of the easiest ways to think about when to use the technologies, if you think about this circle of life, if you will, from end to end of a document, and how does it get created? Well, typically we create a draft by ourselves, on our own. We kind of create that draft, and that's the best place to store that is in OneDrive. You can store it locally, and OneDrive basically is your backup of that in the cloud. Microsoft makes it extremely easy to share that OneDrive, although I think in this case it's maybe one of those where it's, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And in OneDrive, it's probably better if the sharing is not done there, but it's done in Teams. So essentially you take the document, you create it on your own, you create a draft of it, it gets saved automatically and backed up into OneDrive. And then if you need to collaborate with a group, that's when you would move it into Teams. Essentially, Teams is a great space for collaborating, as we all know. And then as you collaborate on that document and ratify it, it becomes your final draft and your published copy. You can look to SharePoint or an intranet site in order to be your procedure manual or your safety manual, or different kind of published documents is where there's opportunity to put that out on SharePoint. So again, OneDrive is your personal space, your personal files, your initial drafts. If you're going to collaborate, Teams does that, and then once it's finalized, you can publish that out using your intranet site out on SharePoint. So that's one way. And I think a very good way to think about the technologies is what's the document lifecycle that happens with many documents.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on that a little bit, I mean, I look at the OneDrive in for those of us that have been on legacy systems, remembers the My Documents world, and that was great, and we're used to that. That's where we saved all of our stuff. But the beauty of OneDrive really is the as Frank mentioned, it really syncs up with the cloud. So it really allows for your data to be backed up. It should always be there, yet you can still pull down those documents. If you're on a flight without Wi-Fi, you can actually work on a document from your OneDrive, and you can edit it and make changes. And next time you log on and connect, it'll replicate it up to the cloud. So it also has built-in backup features that you really don't even know about, that they're happening in the background. So the biggest thing whenever we're implementing something new or beginning to talk about a new project, let's say, is really having a plan and a strategy. Previously, in a lot of cases, businesses would make a decision and they'd say, we're going to change our software. We're going to change our manufacturing platform, let's say. And that decision was made at a leadership level. And then it was really just kind of drilled down to the rest of the team. The team kind of had to adopt it because it was a decision that was made. Well, that immediately put kind of a sour taste in everybody's mouth, and it was less likely for people to really adopt and buy into this new solution. So it's important to plan it out, and getting buy-in is going to be really important. We're going to talk about that in a second, but to make sure that there's an executive sponsor that is really taking a look and says, this is what we're going to do, and then working with the IT steering committee, if there is one. I would suggest you kind of make one if there isn't, and make sure that there's a governance decision. When we say governance, it's really about making sure who has access to what and how that organization is going to look. And then also then kind of creating it within your internal team so that really everybody kind of has a bit of a say in what we're going to be implementing. And adoption is key. I don't know how many times I've sat down and had meetings with businesses, and I generally try to go to the adoption part right away, because most, if not, there's a huge percentage of projects, and the reason that those projects fail is because of adoption. Getting your people to own it and like it and want to use it. So if you look at this kind of diagram here, you'll see that we have enthusiasts on the left. And I always think of enthusiasts kind of as your IT people, the people that are really excited about new opportunities. Teams just came out. I'm super excited. I want to make sure we use that. It might be a little bit too early of an adoption, but they're really excited about it. And then it goes way to the right, and you have the skeptics or the laggards, which they really dig their heels in. They don't want to change. They're happy with the manual process that they were doing before. So there's a combination of all. And it's just really, really important to kind of get buy-in from each of these different departments in order for it to be successful. If employees feel like they're part of the decision, they're more likely to use it. Frank, do you have anything to add to what I just said?
Yeah, I think, Colin, a couple of things on the Microsoft side anyways, when we talk about Teams, there really isn't any governance out of the box. And so as many of us have experienced, when Teams got flipped on, there wasn't any governance. Microsoft has basically said anyone can create Teams, everyone can create channels. And so it kind of, there was this sprawl that happened because of it. So so governance is super important, as you had mentioned, Colin, especially in the Teams and SharePoint area where it's kind of wide open, right? It's important to get that in first, and then as you look to and turn towards adoption, basically the one way to think about it is, typically we implement a proof of concept with a proof of concept team or a test team, and we pick a department to do that, which has kind of this distribution of all of those people in it. Oftentimes, if we can take a step back and look at, hey, can we create a customized team with enthusiasts and visionaries, and they'll lead the way. Maybe we can co-opt some of the skeptics, maybe one or two, and bring them in and show them the value of it, get them turned on to it. Then it really makes adoption that much easier, right? If you can work with those who are really for it, and even if we can turn some skeptics in that first proof of concept, that's very helpful as well. And then the last piece of it is this slide, which is how do we take the technology that's new and make it something that's comfortable for folks. This is one example of what we've done. What we did in this case study is we're creating shortcuts to team sites within Windows Explorer. So everyone is used to using Windows Explorer. They use them for their network file drives. And instead of forcing folks to go to Teams and go to the files area and click on there, we can build some of the bridges, so to speak, right, to link to your team sites or your SharePoint sites right into Windows Explorer. So these kind of helps are really, really great for adoption.
So Frank, yeah, and then, I always think too that, it's part of adoption is making it easy to use. And I think that's what we're really looking at here is, there's definitely some configuration and some more complicated things that we do behind the scenes. But to be able to make it from a user perspective, something that they're used to, if they go to save something in OneDrive, it looks just like their My Documents. And it's just really important to try to make it as comfortable for the end user as possible. So that's a good description here of kind of what we're showing. And this project was a tremendous success, and glad we were able to do it with Perceptive. So moving on here, we have a regional economic development organization. This is a local and national partner for economic development in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. They do have outstate offices as well. But here's a typical problem that maybe perhaps some of you can relate to is, okay, we have some files stored in Dropbox. Years ago, there was a plethora of different cloud-based storage companies that came about, and we started saving stuff in Dropbox and maybe Google Drive and all these different places. And all of a sudden, we have documents spread across multiple different carriers, and it becomes just a nightmare. So with this particular case, we did have that problem where they were using Dropbox and OneDrive. So files were stored in different locations. Employees and external partners were ineffective in sharing their data, and the file versions, as we like to say, quite technical term, a hot mess. So basically there was revisions of files all over the place, and it was hard to figure out exactly which file was important. And in this case, we created an intranet site on SharePoint for external and internal collaboration. So Frank, if it's all right with you, I know that my structure looks a lot like the left here, but I would like to, at least my old structure, I'd like to turn it over to you to kind of talk a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Colin, as you talk about this, and I don't think, you're not alone on the left-hand side. We, as you know, we kind of work with a number of clients who kind of feel embarrassed or like, oh, there's something wrong. Like they feel like they're alone if their files aren't really, if they're kind of a mess, right? But it's very commonplace, right? You're not alone if that's the way you're feeling about your files. It's very easy to do because it just takes time and attention, and also some of the tools, kind of as I mentioned before, like OneDrive, say share, like you can share with OneDrive. So you're being encouraged and incented almost to share with OneDrive, even though it's probably better in another technology. So yeah, this customer had a combination of things going on, one Dropbox and OneDrive, that they were sharing documents, and it was just hard to find things. So we came alongside and basically organized that into some SharePoint sites, some document libraries, and that was how we made this solution where their files more easier to find and more managed and predictable in terms of where to go to find the files they need. I can mention, right here, many folks, and we see it increasing, that many folks are kind of moving towards just using Teams. And so there might be some confusion around, like, is Teams SharePoint, is SharePoint Teams? And it's really pretty simple. If Teams is essentially two technologies combined together, right? Microsoft did a great job. They took Skype for Business, right? The chat and the meetings, and they combined that with SharePoint, making it easy to use. So underneath Teams is SharePoint. So most folks think they're using Teams, and they are, but underneath it, again, underneath the hood is really SharePoint. So whether you use Teams and use SharePoint through Teams, or you just use straight up SharePoint, those files can come together, and we can make it a cohesive whole so they're easier to find.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I think also a good thing to mention here too is really about security and permissions on files. Like when you look at being able to store things in SharePoint, it really will follow what's called Active Directory, which is a structure within Microsoft Windows that helps to manage users and permissions. And within SharePoint, those permissions all kind of come down from the top on these files and folders. So we're no longer setting permissions on each folder for Mary to have access to it. We're able to set permissions within Active Directory. Isn't that right, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw out another buzzword. Microsoft talks about the modern workplace. So that's kind of the direction. That's their M365 kind of offering. And part of this, they've changed a little bit. They've changed some of the permissioning and the security. They've gone to these unified groups, and actually made it a little easier to control some of the access, so you don't have to rely on IT. You can create owners and members as part of your team, and that actually gives them permission, right, to the files that are in those folders. So yeah, they've kind of revamped Active Directory a bit, called it unified directories, unified groups, and you can control permissions that way.
Awesome. So we have an example here of just really, again, going back to what I said earlier about making it easy for people to use. And I believe this is a team shot, right, Frank?
Yes, this is what you can do with Teams. Again, showing a little bit more integration between Teams and SharePoint. If I refer back to that life cycle of a document, right? So you kind of create it yourself in OneDrive, you move it up to Teams to collaborate, and then you publish the document. This screenshot is to show, like, on the left-hand side within Teams, you can give people, your employees, an easy way to get to your intranet site as well. It's not just this collaboration space within Teams, but you can build in that direct path right to your published documents within your intranet site. So this is done through one of the newer platforms that Microsoft has been rolling out, which is Microsoft Viva. And there's several kind of modules within Viva, one of which you probably have been growing accustomed to. It used to be Cortana. Now it's your kind of looking at your emails and your calendar and making some suggestions for you for kind of employee health and prosperity, like, just kind of engaging with your employees, building the culture and helping them kind of adjust to this new modern workplace, right? Of a hybrid kind of in the office type of environment. So that's a sneak peek about, we won't go into depth on Microsoft Viva, but just a little taste.
Yeah, I just want to mention, I think one of my favorite things with getting used to Viva, all of a sudden some emails started arriving from Microsoft, and I kind of thought it was junk for a while. And then when I actually started looking at them, it was making really good suggestions as far as preparing for meetings that day, and it'll tell you some emails that might be associated with that meeting. And then the thing I like best, Frank, is really the focus time that it can set aside for you. It will actually look at your calendar next week and find time where it could schedule some focus time for you. And I know throughout a week, my calendar is changing constantly. So it's nice to have somebody kind of looking out for me, Viva, to be able to set aside some time for me to focus. So it's really been a good tool that I've been using.
No, that's great. Yeah, who'd have thought you need to, put 2 hours of just focus time to get actual work done rather than meetings, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And again, I think with this slide, we're really looking at another user-friendly experience. Isn't that right, Frank?
Yeah. Yep. It's just kind of reinforcing the idea of making kind of SharePoint easy to use, combining it with this Skype for Business. Most of you are probably familiar with it already. Chat and your basically your meetings, your chat, and your Outlook calendar is integrated kind of within Teams, making it easy to collaborate and communicate.
Awesome. So, one of the things, what we're looking at here is really file versions. And I know that in kind of the olden time days, as my daughter would say, there was a lot of files within files. And when you were saving documents, you were saving a Word document as version 1, version 2, or you were saving it as a date. And it was hidden within folders, which is called a nested file system, where you have kind of folders within folders that made it very difficult to find anything. And version history was always something that I struggled with. With SharePoint, we're able to, it'll automatically save versions. Isn't that right, Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this was as part of the case study, how we helped the customer kind of clean up not only their sharing of their documents, where to put them, but also the version control. And SharePoint does that very easily, natively. As documents change, you can click on a link, go back to previous versions, take a look at those if you need to, and restore those even. So not only can you track the changes that happen, but you can go back to previous versions if you'd like. So really cleans up your file storage area.
Right. So this particular case study is an engineering and manufacturing firm. They manufactured parts, and they did small runs of very specific parts for different industries. And it's a mid-sized business. They had a production floor, and they were struggling. Again, you're going to see that word nested folders, which I just used. It's really hard to search in a scenario where you have a bunch of folders within folders. And so the business problem here was just that they needed to be able to search for stuff, because they had tons of different parts that they had run over time. And then they'd have to go back and try to do a revision of a certain part, and they couldn't find what they needed. So they ended up wasting a ton of time looking for their parts. And so that was the case that kind of came to us to figure out how can we solve this. And with the solution we deployed was a SharePoint solution with metadata. And I think that I'm not alone when I ask the question, what is metadata? And I actually looked up the definition of metadata, and it's a set of data that describes and gives info about other data. Who would have thought, right? Data. So I'm going to let Frank kind of talk a little bit more about this particular solution.
So yeah, I mean, this is a graphic that looks to talk about metadata, and it's just really simple. You know what metadata is. We all know what metadata is. When we use File Explorer, you have the name of the file, right? And we have who the author is and when it was saved, right, or stored. That's the metadata. So it's not the actual Word document that would be your data, or the Excel sheet, the data that's in that Excel sheet. It's the data about that. And so we're used to that. We just have never really called it metadata before in some circles, right? And kind of business doesn't, it's just like, hey, those are the properties about this file, right? Is typically the way we talk about it. But it can be expanded, and you can, in tools like SharePoint, you can add additional columns about your files. So not just the file name, but also when it was modified, who modified it, but also you can start adding another column, like what type of a document is it? And when somebody saves the file into the folder, you can require people to say whether this is a regular document, or it's a presentation, or it's research notes. You can see some of those document types in the far right column on the box on the left. So this is an example of metadata, using metadata, giving people options, and starting to use it as a kind of a lightweight document management system, right? And the purpose of it is like what you've talked about, Colin, which is to make it easy to find through search. So searching and filtering based on this type of data that you've entered in, these keywords. I like to use keywords sometimes instead of metadata, but you just find it through, find your files through keywords, and it's right there for you. So makes searching and finding files a lot easier.
Yeah, and it really helped this company out. Again, going back to all the different part types that they had in drawings of these parts, they were able to quickly solve a problem. And if we start looking at what return on investment might look like, they were spending a lot of time looking for these files, and now through search, it was much like Google. I mean, I find it so cool. It's kind of based on the same thing that the internet was based on, but we can do it with our own internal files and look at our things securely. So it's a great, great tool. So Frank, again, I think this is just reiterating the searchability of metadata, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it can go pretty deep, and that's really what it's about. Product series, their model numbers, different spec numbers, SKU numbers, you name it, can be attached and used as metadata, right? Different columns that are attached to the files. So in this case, it helped tremendously.
Great. So this is an organization that is just a really, really cool organization. They're a nonprofit, and they provide financial resources to families and those recovering from serious illness. So, family might be stuck with somebody with cancer, and their funds are starting to deplete just due to the nature of the treatment that's needed. And this organization reaches out and helps, and definitely one that kind of pulls you by the heartstrings a little bit. But this situation was really where they were ad hoc, kind of adding applications as they needed them. So instead of kind of having a baseline for what they use from an application perspective, they were just kind of grabbing onto whatever they needed at the moment. So what ended up happening is they had really a ton of applications, and some were actually doing the same thing. And it created many sources of duplicated data. And this company is looking to grow, but again, being a nonprofit, they needed to keep overhead low, and they needed to do more with less. So we were really able to help them with a Microsoft 365 product called Dynamics. And this was a custom solution that Perceptive helped us with. And again, I think it's just really kind of a cool story as far as how we help them out. Frank, I'm going to turn it over to you here.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So Colin, when you first began the presentation, you showed the Microsoft kind of table of elements, if you will, right? And kind of all of those different boxes with different products. One of those icons is called Microsoft Dynamics, for those who aren't familiar with it. It does not come with your M365 subscription, so it's a separate subscription. And it's basically Microsoft's ERP. It basically can handle everything that you see here, from sales to quoting to marketing to HR, project management. And small and medium businesses can step into this ERP with something in the bottom left-hand corner is called Business Central. So Business Central is the lightweight initial offering, and Microsoft 365 Dynamics would be the whole kind of full-featured, every bell and whistle within each of these modules. So that's a little bit about Dynamics. And what the customer had was kind of an Access database, and they had multiple departments and multiple programs essentially using different Access databases, and they were duplicating effort. And so we came alongside. You can customize Dynamics a bit, add it's called a nonprofit accelerator on it, which basically turns some of the sales tables into what a nonprofit would need to use. And so we added the nonprofit accelerator, and then kind of worked with them to customize their user interface and build it just like they needed it. So I think we have one more after this slide too about kind of what we that shows a little bit more of the nonprofit accelerator. So some of the the accounts and the contacts that would be out there on the sales side are still there. So you still have accounts and contacts, but then instead of opportunities and tracking your opportunities then to sales, it's requests, awards, and disbursements. So so we basically took all of their 3 separate systems, integrated into one coordinated system, and help them to kind of eliminate duplication. And one of the terms that we talk about, right, is does your organization have kind of this RED focus, or an acronym for, relentless elimination of duplication? And so I would encourage folks to take a look at that, right? Where's their duplication? You've identified where that is, and how can we eliminate that?
Right. And Frank, I know too, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit on another case study, but when you're running these different applications, which is quite common, you're also dealing with a lot of times they become legacy applications that may not be supported anymore. So you're stuck with trying to find somebody to still support this old application you might have sitting in the corner, but you need it, but you just hope it doesn't break because you don't have anybody to support it. So this is a good example where we really kind of consolidated those types of application, and we're able to solve it with Dynamics. So it just really made it for a cleaner central repository for all the functions of their nonprofit. So it's just a really cool way to really help them out. So our next case study is a cold storage distribution facility. This was, again, a pretty common distribution center, but it was for cold items that needed to be stored in a cool environment. And there was something as simple as printing that was a employee basically was responsible for. When orders came in, she would have to print out the order and run it literally across the parking lot to their cold storage facility to have the company be able to pick whatever's needed from the shelf and get it distributed. So there was a ton of manual tasks by many employees, and a lot of times they would run into issues if this person that kind of ran the core business function was not there, and she couldn't run these orders across the street. Their company was pretty much dead in the water, and so this person really couldn't be gone. So if it was a snow day, or if this person was sick, their company came to a screeching halt. So what we really did is set up an automated printing task with Power Automate, which is a tool that's built into Microsoft 365 that is used quite commonly for any manual tasks that you think of that have to be done regularly over and over on a daily basis. Automation helps out with lots of different things like that. So Frank, I mean, here's kind of the setup as far as the sequence of how we did this, right?
Right. Absolutely. And one of the reasons, Colin, we talked about, why we selected it is to help businesses start thinking even really small. Like, what are our small tasks that we can automate? And there are probably quite a few of them that are in the organization. And Microsoft M365 now gives us the ability to do that just with your current subscription. So we're back into something that's built in as part of your subscription of your license. Most everyone that has, certainly an e-license or even a small business license would have the ability to use Power Automate and start to automate some of these tasks. So it's a simple way to code, if you will. Microsoft bills Power Automate as a low code. Like, you don't really need a developer to do it, although they can be. Some of them get pretty complex, and so I would argue that it's really developers do need to be pulled in, especially when you have error correction and error handling and things like that. But for some of these, absolutely. You can, in this case, we basically monitored an inbox. So we launch Outlook. You can see in that first step, there's basically 10 steps here. You launch Outlook, you retrieve email messages, you kind of look for a specific message from either a specific sender or a specific subject line. You close Outlook. So just like you kind of would if you were a kind of a person doing these tasks, right? They don't typically open and close it, but in this task, we just opened it, closed it, and then if we found the email, then that in the order that needed to be printed, we just sent that over to the printer and set that up to continue to monitor the inbox. So very simple, straightforward, and that's what Power Automate allows you to do.
But yeah, thanks, Frank. And you know what I think about today with really what Microsoft 365 has opened the door for us. A lot of these automation type things, big companies used to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a solution to automate something so that there was less manual interface between a task or a series of tasks. And so this is a good example here where many years ago, it was too expensive for us as a medium to smaller size business to even think about doing this automation. Now it's literally built into our 365 licenses. As Frank mentioned, if you have an e-license, it's roughly a $20 license, and you have this capability. And the reason we have Coke here is Coke is actually using the same technology today. They used to spend a ton of money on automation, where now they're using Microsoft 365 to really automate their process. And that's available to all of us. And I tell you right now, it's something that is just extremely compelling when you look at trying to get a return on investment on something like this. You're able to really eliminate manual labor and make people happier because things are automated and it's not a tedious task anymore. So it's definitely something I would recommend, even if you're a solopreneur, to look into these repeatable steps that are happening within a given day. A lot of this can be automated right in the software that you're probably already paying for. Wouldn't you agree, Frank?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this next slide is again the power of automate. Microsoft has spent a lot of time and dollars developing what they call their Power Platform. So if you look in the lower left corner of this slide, you see Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents. And these are tools that, again, are built in to really simplify your life and simplify your business. And Frank and Frank's company is really good at helping with these tools. So we lean on them pretty heavily when we have a partner that comes to us and said, hey, we want to see if we can automate this task. We work really well together, and a lot of what we're doing today is this automation stuff. So this case study here, this was a company, it's kind of an interesting company. When you think about events, or you think about even concerts or gatherings or weddings, this is a company that kind of takes care of all that infrastructure for you. So they would sign a contract with you and they would get all the chairs, they get all the lighting, if it was a concert or a speaker event, the microphones, the space, and they would just manage that whole side of it for these companies that needed this. But what they found is they were spending way too much time in their sales process converting opportunities to projects. And so this was a repeated process 3 to 7 times a day, needing to move sales opportunities to actually execute as a project. And again, lots of manual steps. So we're on the automation theme here. You can tell we feel that it's really important, but the automate manual task using Power Automate and SharePoint is really the direction we went, right, Frank?
Yes, exactly, Colin. And what we're doing is just kind of in this case study, extending or showing how Power Automate can be used not only for simple tasks, but it can also be developed and used kind of broadened in more advanced situations. And so, in this graphic, we didn't show kind of all the steps for all of the Power Automate routines, but this is more of a high level kind of view of, okay, this company had an opportunity in Salesforce. They won that opportunity, and after they won that opportunity, they needed to create different sites, right? They created a SharePoint site. They needed certain folders. They needed documents, different templates in these different folders. And so essentially, we used a routine, right, a Power Automate kind of automated process in order to run kind of from opportunity through project execution. And it was taking a fair amount of time for someone to to kind of work this process, right? And an hour they estimated every opportunity to execution. They converted 3 to 7 opportunities every day, which is a great hit rate, I'm sure, from the,
Oh, yeah.
wouldn't we all like to do that, convert
Yeah,
3 to
that's
7?
right.
Right. but actually the automation took really, not even 5 minutes, right? I mean, and so they saved tons of time. Helen, you talked about it before, very high ROI on many of these projects, and this is one example of that.
It is. And, I like to say too that we talk ROI with all of our partners now. And a lot of times there really isn't ROI on technology needs. They say, all right, let's set this up. How's it going? Where, there's hard ROI. In this case, we were actually able to measure hours of time that somebody was spending doing something and eliminate that. It's pretty easy to see kind of a good return on investment on something like that. And the other thing that we've started to measure too, is really employee satisfaction. And you think of, well, how could you measure that? How could that be a part of this technology suite that you're talking about? And by using Microsoft Teams and some of the other tools within Microsoft 365, we actually see culture get better. And we're able to measure that through a series of surveys and different avenues to check in with the folks, and we see an improvement. So all of a sudden now we're measuring soft ROI, which is really hard to do, and I think we're good at it. So I just wanted to share that a little bit, and I'm going to kind of move through our next slide. I think it's a pretty easy one to move through kind of quickly. This is a typical situation where, if you think back to what I said earlier, where there's that application, right, Frank, that's sitting in the corner, that is getting the server that it's running on is gaining dust, and it's something that probably should be replaced. The problem is these people that have, in this case, it's an Access database, but they say, all right, we need to replace that with something we can manage and back up. And they go to a software company and they say, all right, this application here, we need to have done. And the software company says, great, we'll bring it up to speed, we'll reconfigure it, we'll redevelop it for you, and it'll only cost you $200,000. And the small to mid-sized business owner goes, oh my God, you're kidding me. Well, this is a situation where this was a mission critical application on Access. And just by simply moving it to Microsoft SQL Server and the help of Perceptive and their knowledge, they were able to really do this in a much more inexpensive manner in an avenue that a lot of times these software development companies won't take you down. So Frank, can you talk a little bit more to this?
Sure. And I think, Colin, what you said is right on. It's kind of this, it's a mission critical application, but it's kind of corner and nobody's really there who can support it because it was built by a previous employee, and now they want to take it from just office use to get it out on the cloud and continue to use it and leverage what they've, kind of their intellectual property and their business processes that they've already built into it. So that's what this is an example of, where we took that Access database and just kind of brought it to the cloud so that people can use it, moved it to the next size database. I sometimes use a quick analogy. If Access is a small pickup, then your SQL Server is your diesel dually, like Ram, Hemi diesel dually, or Cummins diesel or something in it, right? It's like beefy and built for lots of transactions and lots of payloads. So take that, convert that small pickup truck to a diesel dually.
And this kind of depicts the user interface that was created from all that. So they were able to do exactly what they were doing before, but again, on a platform that was easily supported by many. You didn't just need that guy that knew about it, that would go back and configure something. Seeing a lot of that. In this case, actually, the person that was managing that Access database was deceased, and so they were really kind of stuck having to figure out, where do I turn? And we were easily able to do this with Microsoft products. So we're going to move on here. Mary, are you still with us? Maybe not. But again, the important piece here is with Microsoft 365, we can also leverage single sign-on. So you basically have one password for many applications. We try to replace complicated Excel and Access-based tools with SharePoint, SQL Cloud, Power Apps, Power Automate. So just kind of be thinking about areas where you can replace a manual process with automation, and it's just amazing how easy it is and how much time and money it ends up saving an organization. So in summary, strategy before execution, which we talked about the planning, right? Creating adoption. It's one of the most important things we do whenever we implement something new. Is making sure that your people are also on board with it so that it can actually kind of get some steam and become a great new solution. Versioning and approval within SharePoint, being able to have that automatic versioning so that you can go back and look at version history. And really, again, I just want to stress looking for possibilities within your organization to use these tools. With that, I think we're going to turn it over to some questions, and we'll see you again on our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely.